Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's chilling tales, if you're a fan of spooky stories and love a good scare, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you're ready to feel the goosebumps, go ahead and give this video a like. It really helps support the channel and lets me know you want more. Now let's get into the horror. Let me give you some context first, so the story I'm about to share makes more sense. Our cat, Jasper, has always slept in the basement ever since I was little. My parents made it a rule. Jasper wasn't allowed to roam the house at night because of all the fur he'd leave behind. They were especially strict about it because he also went outdoors, and they didn't want him tracking dirt or leaves into their room. So every night, we'd place him in the basement, where he seemed perfectly happy. It's a large basement, the biggest room in our house, and I guess he liked the space. A little over 2 weeks ago, things started getting strange. Jasper began acting differently. There's a small landing at the top of the basement stairs, just behind the door, and that's where we'd always put him. After a few minutes, he'd wander down the stairs and curl up on the couch or wherever he felt comfortable. But one evening, when I placed him on the landing and shut the door, something unusual happened. From the kitchen, I heard him meowing, but it was more insistent than usual. Odd, I thought. He usually would have just gone down the stairs right away. I went to check, thinking maybe someone had forgotten to feed him, or he wanted out. When I opened the door, he dashed out into the living room, running as if chasing something invisible. I checked his food dish. It was full. Weird. I picked him up and put him back on the landing, closed the door, and thought nothing more of it. But the next 2 nights, the same thing happened. I'd place him on the landing, close the door, and a few minutes later, I'd hear him meowing again. When I opened the door, he was just standing there, staring at the stairs, refusing to go down. At first, I thought maybe he was just getting old, but that didn't explain everything. It bothered me though, so I decided to ignore it, thinking he'd settle down after a while. Then one day, Jasper refused to come inside at all. Normally, when he wanted in, he'd sit by the front or back door, waiting for one of us to notice and let him in. This time, I saw him curled up on the doormat, but when I tried to coax him inside, he didn't move. I gently pet him and went back inside, thinking he was just tired. Hours later, I checked again, and he hadn't moved. It was getting dark, so I decided to carry him in. He wasn't thrilled about it, but I let him sleep in my room that night, knowing he wouldn't want to sleep in the basement. He seemed calmer that way. But after that, something strange started happening. My dad kept complaining that someone was leaving the basement door open. It was letting all the cool air escape, and with the air conditioning running, that was a big deal to him. I assumed it was my younger brother, who's always leaving doors open. But I didn't think much of it. At least Jasper seemed to be more relaxed. Then one night, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. Half asleep, I noticed something strange. There was a silhouette standing in the doorway of my room. It was perfectly still. I could see the outline of a person in the faint glow from the hallway light. I assumed it was my sister, so I called out, "Sarah?" But the figure just silently turned and walked away. I was too tired to think much of it, so I went back to sleep. A couple of days later, we found out what had been bothering Jasper. A flea infestation. The entire basement was crawling with them. It was disgusting. We figured the fleas were why Jasper had been staying away, but it didn't make sense. He'd always worn a flea collar, and we'd never had a problem before. My dad was furious and started scolding my mom for not replacing the collar, even though she swore she had. He went all out, scrubbing every inch of the basement. We vacuumed the carpets, sprayed the entire room with flea-killing solutions, and washed every surface. My dad told us to stay out of the basement for a few days, so the fleas would die off without a host. It seemed like a good plan, and I thought that would be the end of it. But a few nights later, something else happened. I was lying in bed when I noticed light flickering under the door. At first, I thought it was just my dad getting up, maybe going to the bathroom. But the flickering didn't stop. It kept going on, turning on and off in a way that didn't seem normal. I told myself it was nothing, but it was starting to freak me out. I lay there, staring at the bottom of the door, hoping it would stop. Eventually it did, and I tried to go back to sleep, but I've never felt more uneasy in my life. A few more days passed, and my dad said the basement was probably clear. I hadn't been able to play video games down there for a while, so I was eager to go back. But when I got to the basement, I noticed something strange. There were still fleas. A lot of them. It didn't make sense. After all the cleaning, they should have been gone by now. I went back upstairs and called my dad, but he told me to be patient. He insisted the fleas would die soon enough. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. It wasn't normal for fleas to keep thriving after everything we'd done. So the next day after school, I decided to investigate further. I went into the storage area of the basement where we kept old boxes and tools. I opened the door and was hit by a horrible smell. It was thick and rotten, clinging to the air. I followed the stench to the far end of the room, where there was an unfinished crawl space. The smell was stronger there, so I grabbed a flashlight. When I turned back toward the crawl space, I froze. I heard breathing. It was faint at first, but steady. Someone, or something, was hiding back there. My heart raced. The breathing grew louder, as if whatever it was getting closer. I took a step back, but before I could react, I saw a figure move toward me from the crawl space. A hand reached out, fast, aiming to grab me. I jumped back and ran upstairs as fast as I could. I slammed the basement door shut and immediately called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house, but they found no sign of anyone. They did find some empty chip bags and food wrappers stashed in the crawl space, but that was it. The officer said it was probably a homeless person who had sneaked in looking for shelter. But I couldn't help but wonder, how long had they been living there? How much had they seen? My parents were shocked, but we all agreed to keep the basement door locked from that day forward. Jasper still refuses to go anywhere near that door. And to this day, we don't know who or what was living in our basement. When I was a kid, I had an irrational fear of our basement. Looking back, I'd say the fear was justified. Our basement was pretty creepy, even for an adult. It was large, dimly lit, and had this cold, eerie vibe that made my skin crawl. In the center of the room, there was an old L-shaped couch that faced a huge, outdated TV with the ancient gaming consoles we used to play on. Surrounding the couch were various corners of the basement that added to the mystery. A dusty old bar in one corner, a door to the laundry room behind it, and another door to my dad's small workout room in the far corner. We lived in a large house, and my dad rented out the upstairs to a quiet woman named Mrs. Larson. This meant that the only areas we had access to were the first floor and the basement. Most of the time, my dad stayed upstairs, working or watching TV, and we kept to the basement. I'm the youngest of three with two older brothers, and typically we'd play down there together, which always kept me feeling safe. But this time I was alone. I was around 6 or 7 years old, and on this particular day, my brothers were off playing with friends, leaving just me and my mom at home. My dad was probably at work. The basement door had a tendency to creep shut on its own, so if it wasn't propped open, it would slowly slide closed and leave me feeling cut off from the rest of the house. That made everything a little more isolating, especially when I was by myself. I remember sitting on the old couch, playing a video game, when I started hearing strange noises from the laundry room. It wasn't the usual clanking from the washing machine or the hum of the boiler. No, this was different. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, then bouncing a few times. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly shut off the game. My small feet hit the floor as I bolted up the stairs, running to my mom, panic rising in my chest. "There's someone in the basement," I exclaimed. My mom, always calm, assured me there was nobody there. She made me go back with her to check. She opened the laundry room door, turned on the light, and looked inside. After a few seconds, she calmly closed the door again and said, "There's no one in there." Her words should have reassured me, but the fear still clung to me. Despite everything, I felt uneasy. She went back upstairs, and I tried to go back to playing video games, though it didn't feel the same. Time passed, and it eventually grew dark outside. The basement had 2 small windows that let in some light during the day, but once night fell, it was pitch black down there. Even though I was still a little nervous, I decided to go back downstairs. I was sitting back on the couch when I heard the laundry room heater kick on. But this time, it was louder than usual, almost deafening. I turned around and saw that the laundry room door was open. I had no memory of leaving it that way. My stomach dropped. I didn't know why, but I felt an overwhelming urge to shut the door. It wasn't just the sound. It was something in the air, something off about the whole situation. I gathered all the courage I could muster, ran across the room, and slammed the door shut. Then I sprinted back to the couch, as though the safety of the familiar space would shield me from whatever was going on. But the sense of unease kept growing, and that's when I heard it. A voice. A man's voice, deep and raspy, coming from behind me. For a moment, my brain couldn't even comprehend what I was hearing. It didn't feel real. I slowly turned around, and that's when I saw him. A man. A sickly-looking man, hunched over in the corner of the basement booth, his arm resting on the table, his face buried in his fist. "My God, how you've grown," he said in a low, gravelly voice. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body just froze in place, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the man. Slowly, he stood up, his posture crooked and unnatural, and he began walking toward me, dragging one foot behind him. He muttered, "Your mother won't let me see you guys." That was enough. In that moment, every instinct I had screamed at me to run. I bolted for the stairs, screaming at the top of my lungs. "Mom! Mom!" I raced up, stumbling over every step, and reached the kitchen in a panic. I slammed the basement door behind me and locked it, my heart pounding. My mom was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and when she saw me, her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "There's a man downstairs." I screamed. My mom's face went pale, and she immediately called the police. I don't remember much after that, just the frantic sound of the phone call, and waiting in a safe room with my mom and a police officer. The police arrived soon after. They went down to the basement, and we stayed upstairs, terrified and waiting. The next thing I remember clearly is the look on my mom's face when she saw him. The man. It wasn't some stranger. It wasn't even a thief. The man they found in the basement was my uncle. My estranged uncle, my mom's brother. He had been cut off from the family for years after being convicted of horrific crimes. My mom had made it clear he was never to come near us again. But somehow he had broken into the house and was living in the basement, hiding in the dark, for who knows how long. I didn't recognize him at first. I was too young the last time I'd seen him, when I was just a baby. But once I learned the truth, the realization hit me hard. He had been living in our basement, unnoticed, and he must have been there the whole time I'd been hearing those strange sounds. He was arrested again that night and sent back to prison, where he would remain for another 4 years, serving time for additional crimes. We never found out exactly how long he'd been there, or how much he'd seen while he was hiding in the basement. My mom, obviously shaken, made sure to lock all the doors from then on, especially the basement door. To this day, that basement is off limits, and even though we moved away from that house years ago, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like I'm not the only one in the room. After my grandparents passed away, my parents decided not to sell their house, but instead let me live in it, since I was at the age where I was looking to move out anyway. All I had to do was pay for the taxes and upkeep. At first, I really enjoyed having the place to myself. It was nice to have the freedom to invite friends over whenever I wanted. But the novelty of being alone quickly wore off, and I started feeling isolated. So, I decided to get myself a dog, a 2-year-old German shepherd I named Max. I picked the name after one of my favorite movie characters, Maximus, from Gladiator. Max was a calm and gentle dog, the type who only barked when something was wrong or when he was playing with other dogs. I set up his bed next to mine, and after a few days, I started leaving the bedroom door open so he could go downstairs and get some water if he was thirsty in the middle of the night. One night, just a few weeks after I got Max, I woke up to hear him barking frantically outside my bedroom door, his claws scraping on the wooden floor as he paced the hallway. I rubbed my eyes and staggered out of bed, still half asleep, trying to figure out what had him so worked up. As I walked down the hallway, I saw Max at the bottom of the stairs, barking and scratching at the basement door. This wasn't like him. Usually, he'd only bark like that if there was something he didn't trust, but this was different. My heart rate picked up, and I started questioning if I should go down there. I didn't have anyone to call for help. My parents were in another city, and I didn't feel like I could handle whatever was going on. I pushed the door open just enough for Max to nudge it with his nose and bolt down the stairs. The sudden silence after that startled me. Normally, Max was quite vocal, so the fact that he was now completely quiet was a red flag. I turned on the basement light, and my mind raced. Where was he? I called for Max, but he didn't respond immediately. After a moment, I spotted him in the far corner of the basement, standing still with his tail tucked between his legs, his gaze fixed on something hidden behind the wall. It looked like he was trying to make sense of it, but he didn't seem interested in approaching whatever it was. Max's sudden fear made my stomach drop. I moved toward him slowly, my heart pounding. As I got closer, I saw what he was staring at, a closet door slightly ajar. For a moment, I debated whether or not I should open it. The question of who or what could be inside haunted me. I still didn't know Max very well, but I had a feeling he wouldn't attack whoever or whatever was behind that door. I was terrified, but somehow I managed to gather enough courage to pull Max away from the corner. I grabbed him by the collar and led him back up the stairs, his eyes never leaving that mysterious spot in the basement. Once we were back in my room, I shut the door and locked it. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone and called my dad, explaining the situation. After a few tries, he finally picked up, his voice groggy from sleep. I asked him what I should do, and he told me to go back downstairs with a weapon, preferably a big knife, and investigate what was behind the closet door. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too terrified. Somewhere during that conversation, I realized that the basement door had crept open again. I put the phone down for a second, holding my breath, listening intently. Then I heard it, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming toward the front door. My heart stopped. I ran to my bedroom window and looked out, my eyes scanning the dark yard for any sign of movement. The footsteps got closer, and my body tensed. I quickly ran back to my phone and told my dad what I had heard. He told me to hang up and call the police, which I did immediately. By the time the officers arrived, whoever had been in the house was long gone. We quickly realized that a large amount of cash I had left near the bar in the basement was missing. The basement window was wide open, confirming the method of entry. It had been a break-in. The police assured me it was just a robbery, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. The fact that Max had been so alert, and that there was something off about the whole situation, made me feel like there was more to the story than just a random burglary. How did they know I would be home? Why had they waited so long to make their move? Even after the police left, I kept feeling like I wasn't alone in the house. Every little creak or pop in the floorboards would set me on edge. I locked up the basement door for good after that, but I couldn't stop wondering, what if someone or something had been waiting down there long before the thief showed up?